I heard it through the wall. That's the part I keep coming back to. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I had come downstairs for a glass of water, the way I do most nights around 11 when my knees start aching and sleep feels too far away. The kitchen light was off. I didn't turn it on. And that's when I heard my daughter's voice, low and careful the way she gets when she thinks she's being reasonable, coming through the thin wall of the dining room. She said, "She's just always here, Marcus. That's the problem. She's always just here." I stood in the dark with my hand on the faucet, and I didn't move. Marcus said something I couldn't fully make out. Then my daughter, whose name is Claire, whom I named after my own grandmother, said, "I love her. That's not what this is about. But this is supposed to be our house." I filled my glass. I walked back upstairs. I didn't sleep. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My husband Gerald passed 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that doesn't give you much time to make peace with anything. We had 31 years together, and I would have taken 31 more. He was the kind of man who fixed things before you knew they were broken, who remembered every birthday of every person he'd ever met, who once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because our daughter called crying from college over a boy who wasn't worth the gas. When he died, I thought the house would swallow me whole. It didn't, but only because I kept moving. The house itself sits on just under 2 acres in a quiet part of Western Virginia, outside a town small enough that the grocery store still knows your name. Gerald and I bought it in 1991 when Claire was 3 years old. Back then, it needed everything: new roof, new floors, new plumbing, and we did most of it ourselves over summers and weekends, the two of us in matching work gloves, arguing over which way to lay the hardwood. We planted a vegetable garden that first spring. We built a screened porch the summer Claire turned 10. Gerald put in a stone fireplace the winter she left for college, said the house needed something to fill the quiet. That fireplace became the center of everything after he was gone. I'd sit next to it on Sunday mornings with my coffee and talk to him the way you do when someone has been woven so deep into your daily life that the habit of them doesn't leave just because they do. I was 63 when Claire called and said she and Marcus were thinking about moving back. He had been offered a position at a firm an hour away. They'd been renting an apartment in Charlotte that cost more than my first mortgage. They had a daughter, Lily, who was 4 at the time, and another baby on the way. I heard all of this and I thought, of course, come home. What else was I going to say? I want to be honest about something because I think it matters. I did not feel put upon by this. I was not doing them a reluctant favor. I wanted them there. I had rattled around that house alone for 3 years by then, talking to a fireplace and cooking dinners I didn't finish. The idea of Lily's shoes by the front door, of a baby in the back room where the afternoon light comes through golden in October. I wanted all of it. I chose this with my whole heart. We talked about the arrangement carefully, the way adults are supposed to. I told them I wasn't ready to be moved anywhere and that this was still my home. Claire said, "Of course, Mom, that goes without saying." I told her there would need to be boundaries about shared space. She said, "Absolutely." Marcus was quieter in these conversations, but he nodded along, and he seemed genuine. The first year was mostly good. There were adjustments, the way there always are. Marcus liked the television louder than I did. Claire reorganized the kitchen cabinets without asking, which shouldn't have bothered me the way it did. The baby, a boy they named Owen, arrived in March, and the house filled up with the particular soft chaos of a newborn, which I hadn't forgotten but hadn't remembered the full weight of either. I was useful in ways that felt real. I picked up Lily from school. I made dinners 3 nights a week. I sat with Owen in the early mornings so Claire could sleep. I was happy. I want to say that plainly. I was genuinely happy. The shift was gradual, which is the thing about shifts like this. There is no single moment you can point to and say, that's when everything changed. It's a degree at a time, like water getting colder in a bath until you realize you've been sitting in something uncomfortable for a long time without noticing. Brianna, Marcus's sister, started visiting more that second year. She and her husband would come for weekends, and those weekends started stretching. She had opinions, not loud ones, but the kind that accumulate. She mentioned once, at dinner, that it must be nice for Marcus and Claire to have so much help. The word help landed a particular way. I was the help. In my own house, in the rooms I had painted and replumbed and repainted, I was the help. I started noticing how Marcus spoke to me. Nothing you could report as unkind, nothing that would hold up as evidence, more of a tone, a patience that was too deliberate. The kind you extend to someone you're managing. He would tell me things that had already been decided, the new shed out back built without asking me, the vegetable garden I had kept for 30 years, dug up for a swing set. He mentioned it afterward. The way you mention something that doesn't require permission. I said, that garden was Gerald's and mine. He said, there's no reason it couldn't go somewhere else, if it's important to you. Claire started saying things like, we need more space in ways that weren't quite about square footage. She said it about the garage, about the guest room I used as a sitting room, about the screened porch. She said it the way people say things they mean but don't want to claim responsibility for meaning. I started spending more time in my room. I started eating dinner upstairs some nights, telling myself I just wanted the quiet, knowing that wasn't entirely true. Then came Brianna's visit in September. They didn't know I was home. I had gone out to run errands and come back early, and I came in through the side door the way I always do, and I heard the three of them in the living room, Brianna's voice, then Marcus, then Claire, and then Claire said something about a sunroom addition and how it would require repurposing some of the existing space, and Marcus said something about talking to someone about permits, and Brianna said, well, it's really going to be your house fully once you sort out the living situation. The living situation. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went upstairs and sat in the chair by the window and looked at Gerald's photo on the nightstand for a long time. 2 weeks after that, on a Sunday evening, Claire knocked on my door. She sat on the edge of my bed the way she used to when she was 17 and had something difficult to say. I remember thinking, even in that moment, that she still had the same way of folding her hands in her lap when she was nervous. She said they had been thinking, her and Marcus, about the long term. She said the house was getting crowded and everyone needed more room to breathe. She said that they had looked into some really lovely communities nearby. Active adult communities was the phrase she used, places with activities and people my age. I said, this is my house, Claire. She said, I know that, Mom. I said, your father and I built this. Your name is carved into the back porch railing from when you were 7 years old. She looked down at her hands. She said that she knew all of that. She said that things change, and that what works for one chapter doesn't always work for the next. She said they were thinking about the children and what they needed. She said it would be better for all of us. She did not say she was sorry. I told her I needed some time to think. She nodded like that was a reasonable answer, and left me alone in my room. I sat in that chair for a long time after she left. I looked at the walls I had chosen, the particular shade of blue-gray I had repainted 3 times until it was exactly right. I looked at the window I had replaced myself the year Gerald got sick, standing on a ladder in November because I needed something physical to do with my hands. I looked at the fireplace visible through the doorway, dark in September but ready. I thought about Gerald. I thought about what he would have done. And I knew exactly what he would have done, because Gerald was not a man who argued when action was possible. He would have said, quietly and without drama, well, let's see about that. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia, and she has handled our family's legal matters for 20 years. I told her I needed to understand exactly what I owned and exactly what my options were. She confirmed what I already knew. The house was mine, solely in my name. Had been since Gerald and I transferred it to my name alone the year before he died as part of our estate planning. There was no ambiguity, no joint ownership, no legal foothold for anyone. She also told me some other things about updating my estate documents. which were 8 years old and reflected a different set of circumstances. About a trust and what it could and couldn't protect. About what it meant to sell versus to transfer versus to simply decide to live somewhere else. I asked her about the lake cottage. My sister Dorothy has owned a cottage on Smith Mountain Lake for 15 years. It had been sitting mostly unused since her hip replacement the year prior, and she had mentioned more than once that she hated the idea of it sitting empty. We had talked, in the vague way older sisters sometimes do, about me using it more, spending summers there, maybe more than summers. I called Dorothy that same week. I did not tell Claire any of this. I want to be careful here about something, because I have thought about it a great deal in the months since. There are people who will say that I should have had a different conversation, that I should have sat down with my daughter and been clearer, fought harder, said the words that needed saying. And maybe they are right. But here is what I know. I had said those words. I said, "This is my house." I said, "Your father and I built this." And she sat on the edge of my bed and told me that things change. And she did not apologize, and she had already been talking to her husband and her sister-in-law about the living situation and the permits and repurposing the existing space. I did not feel that more words were the answer. I went to see the cottage in early October. Dorothy drove up with me, and we spent a weekend there. Just the two of us, the way we used to do as girls when the world felt too complicated and we needed to simplify it. The cottage is small, 3 bedrooms, a stone fireplace smaller than mine, a deck that runs the length of the back and looks directly out over the water. The maples were turning. The lake was flat and silver in the mornings. I stood on that deck with my coffee on the second day, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt like I was in the right place. Dorothy and I worked out an arrangement. I would take the cottage as a long-term lease with an option to purchase, which her attorney and mine agreed was sensible. She set the terms lower than the market rate because she is my sister, and that is the kind of person she is. I signed the paperwork on a Tuesday, in a notary's office, in a town where nobody knew my name. Then I began, quietly and without hurry, to prepare. I did not rush. That is something I want to be clear about. I spent 6 weeks doing this carefully because it was my home and it deserved to be handled with care. I called a woman I trusted from church about boxes. I arranged for a moving company for the furniture I was taking. Not everything, not even most of it, but the pieces that were mine before the marriage and the pieces that carried Gerald most clearly. The cedar chest my mother gave me, the rocker I'd nursed Claire in, the small writing desk I'd had since before Gerald and I were married. Gerald's photograph and the one of all 3 of us from the summer Claire was 16. I also updated my estate documents with Patricia. This I will not detail beyond saying that I made changes that reflected my current circumstances and my current wishes, which is something every person of my age and situation ought to do, and which I should have done sooner. I arranged for storage for Claire's family's things that had overlapped into my spaces. I was fair about this. Everything of theirs was labeled and protected and arranged to be easily retrieved. I left a clear, detailed inventory. I chose a Thursday. Marcus left for work at 7:15. Claire took the children to school and her own job by 8:30. By 9 o'clock, the moving truck had arrived. I walked through every room before they began loading. I stood in the kitchen where I had taught Claire to make biscuits and where Gerald had made his coffee for 30 years. I stood in the screened porch and watched the light come through the trees the way it does in October, golden and particular. I stood at the fireplace and I put my hand on the stone, and I talked to Gerald one more time, the way I always do, and I told him I wasn't leaving him there, that he was in the cedar chest and the rocker and the writing desk, and in me, and that the house had been wonderful, but the house was just wood and stone, and that the life we'd built in it was coming with me. I left by noon. On the kitchen counter I left a letter. I had written it 4 times before I was satisfied with it. I am not going to share every word of it because some of it is between me and my daughter. But I will say that it was not an angry letter. It was honest, which is different. I told her that I loved her. I told her what I had heard through the wall that night about always being there. I told her what I had heard in the living room about the living situation. I told her that I had raised her to be better than she had been to me in this last year, and that I believed she still was that person, and that I expected her to find her way back to her. I told her the house was still mine, and that she and her family could remain in it while we discussed what came next. I told her she should call Patricia's office when she was ready. I told her I loved her again at the end. Because I do. I was unpacking boxes at the cottage when my phone started ringing that evening. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. Claire's voice was different than I expected. I had braced myself for anger. What I got was something closer to devastation, which is harder. She said, "Mom, what did you do?" I said, "I moved out, the way you suggested." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That's not," and stopped. I said, "I know it isn't what you pictured." I kept my voice very steady. Gerald used to say I had a voice like still water when I needed it, and I needed it then. But you told me this was your house now, and I needed you to understand that it isn't. She said my name. She said it twice. She sounded like she was 17 again and had done something she couldn't undo. Marcus called the next day. I did not answer. He left a voicemail that was formal and careful, the way he gets, talking about sitting down and discussing things rationally. I listened to it, and then I made dinner and watched the sun go down over the water. Dorothy came and spent a week with me in November. We walked every morning along the lake path, and she didn't push me to talk about it, which is why I talked about it more than I would have otherwise. She has a way of receiving things without commenting on them that I have always envied. I talked to Claire 3 times on the phone in the weeks after. The conversations were hard and necessary, and I don't think either of us was entirely comfortable in them. We said things we had needed to say for a long time. She cried during the second call. So did I. She said she hadn't realized how much she had changed toward me, that it had happened gradually and she hadn't seen it from inside it. I told her I believed her. I told her believing her didn't mean we could go back to the way things were. She asked me if I was going to sell the house. I said I was going to take my time. I am still taking my time. I am writing this from the desk, by the window that looks out at the water, Gerald's desk, the one that was his father's before him, and which I am now more grateful for than I can easily explain. It is early spring, and the lake is waking up again after winter. Birds returning to places they know, which I understand better now than I used to. Lily calls me on Sundays. That was Claire's idea, and it was a good one. Lily is 6 now, and she talks for 40 minutes without stopping, and I listen to every word. Owen won't remember any of this when he grows up, and that is fine with me. What I want him to inherit is something simpler than the particulars of this year. Claire and I are not where we were. I am honest about that. You cannot say the things that were said through walls and in living rooms and at the edge of a bed and simply return to before them, because before them you didn't know. Now you know. But we are building something which is different from restoring something. And I have found that different doesn't have to mean lesser. What I want to say, and this is the thing I find myself saying to Dorothy, to my friend Paulette, to myself late at night when the water is quiet, is that it was not about the house. It was about something I watched happen slowly and did not name until I needed to name it. It was about the way I started making myself smaller to fit into the space they were willing to leave me. The way I ate dinner upstairs alone and told myself I wanted the quiet. The way I thanked Marcus for telling me about the vegetable garden, after the fact, as if gratitude was the appropriate response to that. The way I sat in the chair next to Gerald's photo and asked myself whether I was being too sensitive, whether this was just how things were now, whether I was the problem. The answer, when I finally looked at it directly, was no. And here is what I know after 67 years, though I wish I had known it at 30 and at 40 and at 50. No is a complete sentence. The house was mine, and my life is mine, and I did not need to make a case to anyone for why I deserved to remain in it with my dignity intact. I did not owe my daughter's household the version of myself that was easy to have around and didn't take up space, and would eventually agree to move into a pleasant community somewhere so that everyone could breathe. I know some people will say I handled this wrong, that I should have been more direct sooner, that I was too quiet for too long and then too sudden at the end. They may be right. I am 67 and I am still learning. But I know this. I am sitting at my husband's desk in a cottage on a lake in October, and the maples outside are the same extraordinary color they were the first time I came here, and I slept 8 hours last night for the first time in longer than I can remember. And this morning I walked along the water in the early fog, and I did not feel like someone's living situation. I felt like myself. Gerald would have said, "There you are," and I would have said, "I know." I found my way back. If you are someone who has felt yourself getting smaller in the place where you should be largest in your own home, in your own life, in the eyes of people who owe you something they have forgotten they owe, I am not going to tell you what to do. Your circumstances are not mine. Your children are not my daughter. Your life is not my life. But I will tell you this much. Still water runs wherever it needs to go. It doesn't argue with the banks. It doesn't beg for a different path. It simply moves. I am still moving. I am just moving somewhere that feels like mine.